Welcome to the Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I'm excited to speak with Dr. Daniel Laby. Dr. Laby is a former assistant professor of ophthalmology at Harvard Medical School, a pediatric ophthalmologist, and the author of two books, including Eye of the Champion, which we're going to discuss today. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, locumstory.com. Maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story. But do you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities might surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource. It has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. It's easy. One more thing, there's a new link with every podcast. Just click Fanmail and you can text me. I'd love your feedback and suggestions. Well, now to my guest. Welcome, Dr. Daniel Laby.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. And, everybody, just about everybody has two eyes, and vision is pretty critical. You started with children, which I think is pretty, I can't imagine anything more difficult than trying to do, an eye exam on a squirming little kid. So there must have been some other appeal. What was that?
Well, taking care of kids, frankly, is easier than taking care of adults. Adults come in with a long list of questions and problems and discussion things and going all different places, whereas kids come in and just tell you what they see. And either they see it or they don't, and that's all. And if they're really young, they don't even tell you anything. So it becomes a very one-way exam where I detect everything and make the diagnoses and treatment. So it keeps me young. It's fun to play with the kids, to be with the kids. And, we're making an impact on somebody who has many, many years for their life ahead of them.
Yes, it's a good
Uh,
investment. So what are you doing now?
so now I still do both. 2 days a week I see kids in the office, and then the rest of the week, which is really 5 days a week, I'm doing sports vision, working with athletes, trying to discover new ways to help athletes perform better, why they perform well, trying to understand that, and generally learn.
All right, so here's a vision question. When you go to the eye doctor, they put up the big E chart, and 2020 has always been, that's perfect vision. First of all, what does 2020 mean?
Well, I will start by saying 2020 is definitely not perfect vision. Um, let's think about 2040, we'll say. That's a little bit less than 2020 in terms of vision. 2040 means that you can see from 20 feet what the normal average person can see from 40 feet. And so that means you have to be 20 feet closer than the average person to see the same thing. Now, if you have 20/20 vision, you see from 20 feet what the normal person sees from 20 feet. You're both 20 feet away. Therefore, you must be normal. And normal is an important word because normal is not optimal or best. It's just average, right? And in fact, to tell you the truth, that average number varies depending on what test you use. The eye chart you mentioned is called the Snellen chart. Been around for about 120, 125 years. They have letters. If we use numbers or if you use rings or letters E, that all gives different average results. And then age plays a role. If you have a teenager or someone in their 20s, usually we average is probably going to be better than 20/20. Whereas certainly someone who may be 80 is not going to quite have an average vision for an 80-year-old of 20/20. So it varies quite a bit, and we can talk later about different ways to test in athletes because athletes obviously have very superior vision. Um, it's important how you test the vision and whether that test is really reflective of real life needs to see. When you look at the Snellen chart, it's black on white, and you can stay there for half an hour trying to figure out what the letter is, and you may give five different guesses before you have your final answer. And that's not at all what life is like. When you're driving on a highway where it's foggy and it's dusk and it's hard to see, you have to decide pretty quickly, what street it is and whether you're going to turn or not. You don't have the luxury of time and guessing over and over again to try to figure out the correct letters. So Snellen chart really is not an ideal method. It just seems to be the standard methods used.
Well, my personal anecdote there is when I was in college, I tended to sit towards the front to see the board better and also to pay attention, but I didn't realize I had any vision problem. But when I was driving, I noticed that I routinely missed the exits because by the time I could read the number or where it was, zing, I
Yep.
was past the exit. So that's when I went to the eye doctor. So you mentioned something earlier that I thought was interesting. Do athletes have better vision than the average person?
So just like the average person is what is an average person? What is an average athlete is equally perplexing. We really have to think about the different athletes in different sports. And we've written many papers about many different sports, what the vision is. Because no one had really been, when I started doing this work in 1992, 93, 30 odd years ago, no one really had even just described what normal is. And if you don't know what normal is, an athlete, you can't tell if they have a problem or not. And so we started looking in baseball as our first group. We worked with the Los Angeles Dodgers starting in 1992. And we wrote a paper in 1996. In fact, the first paper published in the standard ophthalmic literature on sports vision, because sports vision often was looked at askew by most regular ophthalmologists, will say, as not being true science and so forth. And we wanted to make sure we did it the right way. And we published this paper in the American Journal of Ophthalmology about what the average vision of a baseball player is. And if you use the Snellen chart, which is what we used then, the average vision is 20 over 12.5. So that means that they can see from 20 feet what the average person had to be 7.5 feet closer, 12.5 feet away from the eye chart to see the same thing. So they definitely had better vision. We learned that actually by having a regular chart the first year and everybody read the whole chart. And we realized this isn't working too good because the bottom of the chart was 2015. And so we ended up having to put people twice as far away than we should have if we had used the chart correctly to change 20 over 15 to 20 over 7.5, which at 7.5 is basically the limit, the understood limit of human vision, 20 over 7.5. So when you mentioned earlier, what's great vision, what's the best vision possible, it's not 20/20, it's 20 over 8 or 20 over 7.5. That's the best vision possible. So if you go into the eye doctor and he says you have the best vision possible, your listeners should chirp up and say, I don't think so. Best vision possible is 20 over 8. I'm only 20/20.
All right. Now, this is a medical podcast, and I don't want you to get too granular, but I wonder, can you tell me what is it about the eyeball, or is it the brain? I'm a neurologist, so I'm interested in that part of the vision that makes 20 over 8 the best you can do. Why can't it be 20 over 6?
Yep. And so you want to think about the system like a camera, like the old film cameras we used to have, where we have a lens, you have to focus, you have film in the back of the camera, and you have to process the film obviously afterwards. Well, if the lens wasn't quite focused, then you're not going to get a 20 over 8 picture, right? You're going to get a 20/40 picture. And we solved that, as you know, with a pair of glasses to change the refractive error, the focusing power of the eye, in order to make it correct. But then we have the internal parts of the camera. And if those internal parts of the camera are fogged or scratched or dirty with dust, that's like a cataract, if you will. That's going to interfere with the way the light comes in towards the film, and it's not going to be sharp either. Certainly not sharp at the levels we're talking about. Then you had the film itself. Well, remember there was something we used called ASA, now they call it ISO on cameras, which is looking at basically how grainy or how sensitive the film is. And so if you have little pieces of, I think silver halide or something, whatever that film is made on, that are far apart, then if a piece of picture, if a piece of an image falls between those two little pieces of chemical, you're not going to see it because it's not going to activate either one of those pieces. If you have a tight array of those little elements, you're going to have a much better, much sharper picture. The pixels on a computer screen, same kind of thing. Or a camera, the new Apple phones with all these megapixels of who knows how many thousands, that all is going to increase the resolution versus what we had, which was terrible, I guess. So they tell me, 20, 30 years ago in terms of pictures. Good to me, but so that's the film. So if the film is not good, that's the retina in the eye. And so depending on that retina, people that are very nearsighted, for example, have retinas that tend to be stretched, and so the photoreceptors are further apart, like those grains of film on the camera, you're not going to have as sharp a picture. So someone who has a highly nearsighted person, a high myope, we're not going to expect to have the 20/8 vision. We'd be happy with 20/20 and even 20/25 if it was like a -15 or something power lens that they need to in order to see properly. And then we have the development, and development is our brain. And as a neurologist, you can appreciate that a good portion of the brain is related to vision one way or the other, whether it's, actually seeing what you're seeing or reacting to what you're seeing or in the peripheral vision, motion detection, all the different pieces that go into appreciating the world. I don't want to equate, people that don't hear with people who don't see, but my sense is that people who don't see may be in a more tough spot than people who don't hear, especially if you had that sense when you were younger and you grew up with it. In other words, losing it. Um, so that's the development. And all of it has to work perfectly in order to get that 20/8 vision. And we can't get the 20/6 because we don't have enough megapixels in our camera, for example. We're just not able to do that. But it also depends on the test. Remember, I mentioned that if it's the letter test or the number test, or if it's a letter C or a letter E test, that'll make a difference. It depends what we're trying to distinguish. Are we trying to identify a target or determine differences in depth? Our depth perception actually is a lot better than our ability to detect actually differences in lines. You can look at something that when you look at it with your eyes, you don't see any difference. When you put your 3D glasses on, you detect the 3D difference. We're more sensitive in that regard, comparing what each eye is seeing, whether there's a difference there. So it really varies on the test. It varies on what you're asking, the person to do or the eyes to do or the visual system to do. But pretty much 20/8 in that range is the best. No one's going to get to 20/1, for example.
So I'm thinking you got a young guy and he wants to be a baseball player, and so it turns out he's really good at hitting home runs because he's, strong and paying attention and he's got good stance. But maybe part of that talent is really that he can see the ball better than most. And so, do you think that the system just selects for people with better vision? Is that how it happens?
Like, my own personal story in Little League, I was pretty good when I was younger in Little League. And then it got to the point where the pitchers were getting better and they were throwing faster and I couldn't, do well with the pitch and I wasn't very good anymore and went to med school. So it there's no question that you'll get to a point where your skill isn't good enough to succeed, right? And everyone's going to have a different level there. And if you're really good, you'll never get to that point because you'll be a Major League Baseball player. And so it really varies quite a bit in that regard. But it's really the total package. It's not that you have to have 20/6 or 20/8 or 20/10 vision. In fact, you don't even need to have the average 20/12 because that's just average, right? The people, there's a joke about you finish medical school, the bottom of your class, what do they call you? And they call you doctor, right? You have to have a certain level of ability and proficiency. You don't have to be the best. But you have to have that level in all the different pieces, like a chain, that must all work together in order to perform well in the sport. And that's true of any sport, to tell you the truth. They just have different levels of need for different skills. But if you have that, then you can be good. In fact, players like Manny Ramirez, if you remember him from a few years ago, he wasn't the best in any one of the things we tested, but he was really good in everything.
Hmm.
And that total package is what made him, what he was in terms of playing. And reports of Babe Ruth are similar to that, from reports from the 30s. And so you don't need to be the best. You just need to have enough ability to perform. And if you have all those pieces, you'll get all the way to Major League. If you have a few of them, but not enough of them, at some point, the pitchers are going to be better and you're not going to make it.
But when you did look at, 100 major league players, was their vision in aggregate better than average?
Absolutely. The average being 20/12 for the sharpness, the acuity part of it, compared to 20/20, if you will, average for general population, a statistically significant difference. When we look at hand-eye coordination, reaction time measures, we find them equally different between the two groups. When we look at tests of visual concentration, of how long you can concentrate on visual information, there was a difference there. When we look at a newer test of vision, which not only incorporates the size of the target, and this is what we use now routinely, size of the target, We add contrast. We have lower contrast targets, and we have targets that are only shown to the subject for a very short time, 200 milliseconds, for example, a very short flash. And so you have to recognize the target correctly based on its small size, faintness, because it's low contrast, and only having to view it for a very short time. And when you look at those results between general population and the baseball players, again, the statistically significant difference, and those differences predict performance. Actually, they relate to batting in-game batting metrics called plate discipline metrics. In other words, walk rates, how often someone walks, how often they swing at strikes in the strike zone, pitches in the strike zone. Those all correlate. So actually correlates to performance on the field.
Wow. So is this going to be part of the selection process?
Well, in fact, it already is. For the last several years, I've been going to the Major League Baseball Combine that they run prior to the draft every year, and we check several hundred players to see how they score on this battery of tests, which is what we can use then to determine, we'll say, likelihood of success in professional baseball. Now, each club, takes that information and does what they want with it. Some clubs ask me directly, what do I think? What's going on here? Some clubs, for example, if they have a guy who's in college batting really well and doesn't score that well on the test, then that might be someone who I call them a diamond in the rough, right? Someone who performs already good. If we get their vision stuff tuned up, then when they get to the pros, they may even be better. So you may be able to sign somebody, for a lower value, if you will, but they may actually be worth a lot more once we get this stuff fixed up.
So that's just where I was headed. Suppose I've got everything, but my vision score is kind of low. And it's like, oh, gee whiz, if only I could see better, then I'd have more home runs. So is there any way to amp it up? How can I fix it?
Yeah. So the question is, what area, which one of those chain links is not what we want them to be? And that's the one we want to address, or the several we want to address. And I have something that I describe in my book here called the sports vision pyramid. And if you look at each of these levels of a pyramid is built because there's a wide base and it goes to a narrow apex. And if you have a wide, stable base, you'll have a nice big pyramid that will last thousands of years, as we know from many parts of the world. And so the bottom level is what the eyes can do, each eye by itself. The visual acuity, we'll say, but it's really acuity, contrast, and processing information quickly. If there's weakness there, corrections may be glasses, maybe a tinted lens to increase contrast, like skiers on a ski slope would wear a yellow lens often to increase the ability to see the dips in the slope and so forth. Or we can train the ability to recognize information more quickly. That's the bottom level. The next level up there then is how you use both eyes together. Stereo vision, depth perception. We can train that. Above that is how you make decisions based on what you see, obviously in a very short time. We can work on that. And then it's how do you execute a motor action based on the vision, right? Because if you're hitting a baseball, you're going to be having to put the bat at a certain point in space where you think the ball is going to be at that instant so you can hit it squarely, out of the park. Well, it's a visually guided motor action. So we can test how fast you can make that, how accurate you can do that, and then we can train and correct in those areas. So depending on where in the pyramid the problem is, we can intervene where we need, making sure that each of the levels below is optimized before we try to optimize the top. Because if you have a pyramid that has a wide top and a narrow base, it's not going to stay very long in a stable position. And that's not going to be conducive to good performance.
Uh, Before I forget, I did want you to tell us where you can find your book.
Yeah, so the book is actually written it's a non-medical book. Medical people will enjoy it, whether you're an ophthalmologist or you're not an ophthalmologist, but it has a lot of vision science in it, obviously. But it's really written more for athletes and parents of athletes, if you will, so that they can be armed with the information they need when they go to the eye doctor or a sports vision specialist to advocate for themselves to be able to get what they need to optimize their performance and perform better, get the scholarship, get the contract, and so forth. The book is available on Amazon. If you just type in Eye of the Champion, or if you type in my name, Eye of the Champion, or my name, Sports Vision, it will come up there. We published it in February, March this past spring. It's done pretty well. A lot of people, I get a lot of emails, people interested in it. It goes along with a YouTube channel I have about sports vision by Dr. Laby. 15,000, I think, close to 15,000 subscribers there that watch the videos. And there's a lot of information there. And the more information, we know as physicians, the more information the patient has, and the better aware of their condition they have, the easier it is for us. We can then share our knowledge with somebody who has a good basis of knowledge and help them make decisions for what's best in their future. And my aim here is to do the same with athletes.
Well, I was excited about having you on the program, of course, because of your book, but also I didn't realize that sports vision was a thing. I didn't know there was such a thing. How many sports vision ophthalmologists are there?
Sports vision ophthalmologists, not too many. We can probably, get to maybe two hands, maybe take 20 as a maximum. A lot of it depends on, what the level of commitment, if you will, or engagement with the field is, how you define how many there are. There are a lot of people that, do things on the side and their thrust is another area of medicine. There's very few, for example, that spends the majority of their time doing sports vision as I do. Uh, if there were three or four, I'd be surprised, to be honest with you. It's a very niche area. It's more in optometry. There are many more sports vision optometrists. One of the problems in there again is rigidity or fidelity to science and scientific the scientific method and so forth. And that was one of the things that really knocked sports vision for a long time, was the fact that a lot of the work was much based on very small sample sizes, on samples of one. It worked for this guy, so it's going to work for that guy. And as we all know, that isn't necessarily the case all the time. What we tried to do is have studies where we have 300 to 500 subjects in each report we publish, all of our publications in peer-reviewed journals. And we felt that was what was needed in the field to try to give some credibility and some, we'll say, organization to this type of sort of thing.
I think there may be members in the audience who want to ask, well, is there anything I can eat, like a carrot or supplements to take that's actually, as you mentioned, science, that scientifically is going to help?
Yeah, so carrots are great, but we probably have enough carrots in our diet that we don't have to worry too much about that problem here in the United States. Perhaps in some parts of the world, but not here in the United States. The biggest thing you can do is get your eyes checked, by an ophthalmologist at least once a year, certainly as you get older. But then be able to advocate for yourself what you need. Because, if you're someone, like many of us physicians reading books and staying, a lot of our life is up close, it may not be bad to have a little bit of nearsightedness not corrected, help us with our reading, our vision up close. That may be useful. On the flip side, if we like to go out and skeet shoot or, play golf, and we need to see at greater distances, then we want to have a pair of glasses that are going to correct for that. And maybe we need to make sure we have the right selection of glasses, whether they're bifocals or not, but for different aspects, in order to achieve our best vision, plus be most comfortable. It's too long, I think, to describe fully here, but there's a concept that people can look up that's really interesting that will make a difference. We published on the difference of this effect in NBA basketball players. We work with some NBA teams, and that's something called the quiet eye. And the quiet eye is a very interesting concept. And again, I'm not going to give it all away. It's in the book, but you can read it online too. The quiet eye basically is what you're looking at before, during, and after a critical moment in a task. So if you're a surgeon and you're, excising tissue or stitching the aorta, whatever you're doing, what you're looking at before, during, and after your actual performance of that task is going to be critical to the success of that task. Very obvious in putting. If you watch the putter hit the ball and then immediately watch the ball go to the cup, your chance of sinking that putt are much less than if you allow the putter to hit the ball, but you keep your fixation right at the point of contact between the putter and the ball and let the ball go on its own way for about half a second or a minute. I'm sorry, half a second or a second, and then watch it. It's going to go the same place either way. Where you're watching is not going to make a difference. But the fact that you watch and keep your eyes on that point of contact will ensure a better contact between the putter and the ball and more likely put the ball in the cup. And that's true in putting. We did it with free throws in the NBA and published this paper. If you look at the success of free throws and you look to see what people are looking at when they're making their free throws, the people that are really finely honed in on a spot on the rim and their entire time, every 30 free throws, they're looking at the same spot, they're going to hit 30 out of 30. You get the guys who hit 14 or 15, they're looking all over the backboard, all over the rim. You see the fixation points all over the place, and they're less successful, 50% less successful. And that's true in baseball. We've seen that. It's true in hockey. It's true in many, many sports. What you're looking at before, during, and after this critical moment of decision or action becomes very important in the success of that action.
Well, I like that. So, and this goes back to what you were talking about training, that there are ways to improve your functional vision by very specific training.
Absolutely. And we can, they can do training to increase your visual acuity. Probably about a half a number, like a 0.5 number on your glasses can be trained. You can train the visual cortex, if you will, to recognize differences that otherwise you wouldn't, that would be equivalent of seeing a little more sharply if you had a pair of glasses. We can train, concentration, reaction time, speed of reaction. We can train the quiet eye, certainly. None of it is really training your eyeball. It's really training the computer program that's running the eyeballs, because the eyes simply are dumb collectors of light. They're not really involved. There is processing of vision in the retina, but the real stuff is happening up over here, and that's the area that we can train. Whether it's detecting motion, following targets, all different pathways. From the eye. We think about the pathway, the vision pathway, eye back to the back of the head, occipital cortex, and then forward. And that's one route, but there's other routes that go through more brainstem, thalamus, superior colliculus areas that are involved in motion detection, peripheral vision. There's ear information that's fed into this computer that's determining what we're seeing as well. There's previous experience that are affecting what we're seeing. There are biases that we have based on what we think is going to happen that's going to affect what we actually see. We can't pay attention to everything our eyes see. Our eyes see, lots of information in the room. But right now I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at all at what's happening in the periphery. My brain's suppressing that information. Well, that's how I get the information is going in from the eyes, but the brain's turning it off. And if something happens out there, I may or may not see it depending on where it is and how it moves. So all of this stuff can be evaluated. If you're a basketball player, what's happening out here is critical. If you're a baseball player, it's really what the pitcher is doing in front of you what's important. So each sport has a different set of needs, and you need to understand what sport we're playing and what vision we want to improve.
Well, this is really fascinating. I have one last question. And, we're getting very technologically sophisticated. There's experiments now where we can implant electrodes in the brain and connect them to a computer via Bluetooth and, even to help people with speech, figure out what they're going to say. Are there any prosthetic ways, bioprosthetics, to make our vision better?
Well, I don't know. These seem to be prosthetic to me. Certainly glasses, lenses, what I call prosthesis, if you will. We don't really consider it that, but that's really what it is. When we're looking at elite athletes, the differences are so small, for the visual abilities that the current state of technology for implants is far too gross. Retinal implant, people only can see dark and light, really. Maybe pick up a big shape, but that's about it. And we're way on the other end of the spectrum in terms of elite vision, for an athlete. And so there isn't anything in that regard. Now people are looking at whether transcranial stimulation, whether it's electricity or magnets, can make a difference here, specifically in training. But really, the old method of practice makes perfect is kind of a really good approach, because our brain is very malleable, right? It's very, it can be trained very well. It can be changed. We change our brain every day. Just listening to this podcast, people's brains is changing, I'm hoping, by hearing this information and thinking about different things. And so that sort of thing is what, I think is the best, truest way to leverage the incredible power of the brain in terms of vision by using it in training.
Fantastic. Dr. Daniel Laby, thanks for joining me on The Art of Medicine.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's great fun.
Before we close, I'd like to give another thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com, a resource where providers can get real, unbiased answers about locum tenens. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time.
This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on The Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com